Special thanks to my Patreon patrons, Noble Tier and Larking Tier. Hey guys, it's Michael and I'm back for another reaction video. We are finally back with some more conspiracy theory Iceberg. I don't know what part we're on, like 10 I think? But we're so far into this thing already. I don't have much to say, let's get straight into it.
Hacker, and the description reads, at extreme depths, the very structure of reality as you know it vanishes. Able to control the flow and having mastered the world and those around you, one last question remains. Can you master yourself? Depatterning is closely related to a concept known as psychic driving. Essentially, psychic driving works like this. It is a concept that by taking a person and making them listen to the same sounds and words and codes over and over, you can begin to work their personality backwards. This is all working off of the idea that a personality is developed by an individual over time and slowly built up as that person grows and matures, which means therefore you can deconstruct it, or in other words, a means of unlearning learned behavior. There are records of this occurring during the MK Ultra experiments because of course there are.
Yeah,
the theory was that showing someone specific visuals or making them listen to specific audio strands forward, backwards, and every other way will eventually cause them to begin to forget themselves. So that's psychic driving. Depatterning is everything I just said with electric shock therapy and LSD. Depatterning isn't only trying to reset someone's personality, it's also trying to dig all the way down to their subconscious. The idea being the combination of electric shock therapy and drugs could allow for the observer to speak to the bottom level of a person's psyche. Take that a step further, and some apply this concept to modern media, with the idea being there are very subtle tones and secret messages, and this is similar to backtracking, hidden in a lot of media we consume as a means of keeping us either docile or slowly chipping away at our higher order thinking. Or in other words, your mom was right. Too much TV fries your brain. Illuminati are the good guys. Hey, exactly what it says.
But let's be honest, how often do we watch like TV? People watch TV nowadays anymore. It's mainly just like online. So is YouTube killing your higher order thinking also?
In other words, your mom was right. Too much TV fries your brain. Illuminati are the good guys is exactly what it says. However, to get to the true meaning of it, you have to analyze the Illuminati itself. See, when the original Illuminati began, because it was an actual organization, in the 1700s, the idea was these French noblemen came together in order to start an organization that would allow for the people to more so govern themselves, or at least a small group of people to decide what happens to them. This was done by having members of the Illuminati infiltrate the government and proliferating the ideas that the group wanted across governments and peoples. However, if the original group standard of self-governance is it, then maybe they're not necessarily as evil as we think they are. This theory is saying that maybe this organization's purpose was to make sure the government doesn't get too out of hand. And considering what governments have been capable of throughout history, perhaps there needs to be a group of people to keep them in check. So therefore, all of the hate we know about them, or ideas of the Illuminati being evil devil worshippers, would be the result of centuries-long smear campaigns against the group proliferated by governments. And this demonization that they have done against the organization would be a means of making themselves seem the good guys in a historical context. The Illuminati, of course, assuming they do exist, would have to exist from the shadows and therefore cannot defend themselves openly. So think of it this way. If the Illuminati is real and they're working behind the scenes of world governments in order to proliferate the small group's idea, then who's to say they're the bad guys?
This theory is actually crazy. That's like, it's weird because it makes sense. That's the weird part about it. Oh, that one's crazy. Oh, I don't know what to say about that one. That one actually kind of freaks me out a little bit.
Of world governments in order to proliferate the small group's idea.
Yeah, because they can't defend themselves.
The bad guys. Because, you know, it's not like a government would lie to us about a group of people who they don't like. I mean, the government doesn't lie, guys. Like, come on. Demolition elves refers to sightings that have happened across the world.
Wait, what?
That before and after disasters, people have seen these small creatures at the site of the event. Historically, description of these things match up with that of trolls and elves, either short, stumpy creatures that don't have human proportions, or these impossibly skinny figures that seem to dance across the rubble of whatever building just collapsed. The most famous examples of this being 9/11 and the Silver Bridge incident, which after both of them, several witnesses reported seeing small people crawling across the rubble. Theories of these creatures range from everything that they are these evil sort of demons that enact natural disasters in order to be bad, I guess. Or that perhaps these things are summoned by the parties in question to get across whatever motive they want. Or perhaps these things are summoned by the parties that actually committed the disaster, because if you think about it, if you believe in demons and you think demon summoning's real, then who's to say that people wouldn't use those capabilities in order to do not so nice stuff. War is fake isn't saying that no wars ever happen, just the motivations for them. A lot of this relates back to shadow organizations and things like the Illuminati.
Okay. This one is one that could be real. Don't kill me, government.
Because if there's things that exist in the supernatural realm that the regular people don't know about, but these higher elitist rings do, then it makes sense that there would be battling of some kind over them. And if that's true, then several of the wars throughout history that we as the public know for being over money or land or what have you could actually be over these more important ideas. Like what I talked about a couple tiers back, the US didn't invade Iraq for oil. It was for the Stargate, obviously. I'm just going to start like a history series on this channel where I take tragedies throughout history like wars and famines or whatever and make entirely baseless claims. Like the plague, right? Those people weren't killed by a disease. No, it was giants and also Hitler. And then I'll just turn off the comments and say that anyone who disagrees with me is in on the conspiracy. YouTube's so fun. Tesseract, Earth, or universe is referring to the shape of a tesseract. So we understand the universe to exist in 3 dimensions, that being height, width, and depth, right? And this is often shown through the example of a square. If you have a flat square, that's 2-dimensional because it goes height and length. If you have a cube, that's 3-dimensional because it's height, length, and depth. The idea of a tesseract is that it is a 4-dimensional cube, which means it would exist in a 4th dimension that we can't directly observe. As you're probably aware, if you're at tier 8 of the iceberg at this point, there are several theories about different dimensions that we can't directly see as people, but they would still exist nonetheless. The most common of which being time and the idea that it can be manipulated. However, we existing as people can just pass through it at one pace in one direction. So the tesseract existing as a 4-dimensional square, when applied to the Earth or universe, implies that there is these greater 4th dimensional properties that we can't exactly understand. In other words, either the planet we live on or the universe we exist in is moving a lot more complexly than we can see, and perhaps anomalies, which could be everything from random explosions to supernatural sightings, could just be the results of these 4th dimensional occurrences that we can only catch.
I've heard this before, and this is like the most like comprehensive like theory for this, that the reason why supernatural stuff happens is because it's in a 4th dimension, and that makes the most sense to me.
Could just be the results of these 4th dimensional occurrences that we can only catch glimpses of. Oh boy, this one. So as soon as I like started this iceberg and scrolled through it real quick, this was like the first one I saw, and I was thinking, there is no way I can do this, but I'm about to. Remember how in tier 2 of this iceberg, way back before I was a YouTuber and all, I talked about quantum suicide and immortality? The reason I spent so much time talking about it was to justify this one. In the theory of quantum suicide and immortality, it followed the idea that anything that can happen will happen in one branching universe. So if string theory is to be believed, and if the idea of these infinite universes is to be believed, then that means every possible outcome has to exist within one of these worlds. Which, as I explained with quantum suicide and immortality, that means for every individual, there has to be a universe where they live at a theoretical forever, and a universe in which they commit not alive at every possible point forever and ever. So that means in one existing universe, there has to be a version where John F. Kennedy committed suicide while in the motorcade at Dallas. So who's to say that we aren't that universe? Perhaps that's why the CIA was so weird about it, because at the height of this political turmoil with Russia, how awful does it look if a leader commits suicide? What if, as Lee Harvey Oswald said, he was the patsy because they needed an excuse? What if the pressure of being the leader of one of the world's superpowers was too much for JFK and he couldn't take it anymore? And what if he wanted to go out during a parade with the whole world watching? That, or he just ran a really long string like from the car up to the window and then just was really good at timing. And the best thing about quantum suicide and immortality, that had to happen somewhere. might as well be here. And you literally can't fight me on it because that's how the theory works. Everything that can happen happens somewhere. So here it is. And if anyone's in the comments calling me stupid for it, well, guess what? They work for the CIA.
The best
See,
excuse.
it's that easy. I love my job. Mao statues were Rapa Nuians, which I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. Again, sorry.
They were what?
These statues are the technical name for the commonly known Easter Island statues. See, once the first settlers of the industrialized world arrived at Easter Island, these statues were already in place. According to the mythology of the people, this was statues to commemorate the Rapa Nuians, or the original founders of the island itself. However, there are theories circulating that these old original founders of the island died and were set in their place as the statues. Now, while most normies would take this to mean that the statues were built on top of the Rapa Nuians' gravesite or perhaps their land, cool people believe that perhaps these statues aren't statues at all and are quite literally the fossilized remains of these first people. Or, in other words, giants. So the Easter Island statues are frozen giants, and just like JFK shooting himself, you cannot tell me I'm wrong. Math Hacker has to do more with an overarching theory with numbers as they exist in the known universe. Because when you think about it, numbers are really amazing in the fact that they can be used to quantify every known occurrence within the known universe, or the fact we can do things like make equations to figure out how the speed of light interacts with blah 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 or whatever. What this theory is saying is that perhaps through the use of numbers, one could gain the ability in order to manipulate reality itself. Or in other words, the secrets of the universe
Seems
or
possible.
the secrets of the simulation we're in, as some would say with this theory, because there's another bigger theory that numbers are the lines of code that exist in our computer, but that's for another day. Math could be used to hack the universe, basically. Real meaning of hybrid RPG was so weird to find information on. So it was a role-playing game called Hybrid that was canceled in 2002. The only existing text file of it is a rule set that the author says is roughly 30% completed at the time of the cancellation. Reading through this thing, not only is it absolutely massive, but it just seems like sort of insane ravings. Like, for example, there are over 500 rules, and the rules are really weird, and they cross-reference each other, so while you're reading one rule, you have to scroll down to like 278, and then that rule is just some talk about how politics works. So then you go back up to 3, and then it says you have to jump down to 400, and the whole thing kind of works like that. Several of the rules are just
Sounds
very
like a waste
long
of time.
equations for things like how gravity interacts in a sphere and really weird specific stuff. However, what leads to interest are some of the references that are made throughout the rule sheet. Like, for example, one part, the author begins talking about the Matrix and how important it is to understand the walls of the simulation you're within. That goes back to the theory that the real meaning of the hybrid RPG was to create a rule set for the world we exist in, or to create a rule set for a simulation of the world we exist in, or we're the simulation and these are some of the rules for where we exist. That would explain the talk of politics, that would explain why the Matrix and ideas of a simulation were brought up, and why equations for how gravity works and very specific concepts of physics kept being brought up. The idea being that this RPG itself was perhaps a look through the cracks at what our reality actually is, or a warning to us of what our reality actually is. Deep soy is closely related to the weaponized femboy thing I talked about in the last tier. So in that theory, it was the idea that soy is used on other countries as a means of immobilizing their masculine population, whereas deep soy is saying that perhaps the government would do that same thing to their own people. The idea being that higher ups have implanted this idea of societal laziness, or in other words, everything is about looking at a screen, sitting down and doing nothing, and letting other people take care of issues for you. And according to the theory, this leads to everything from obesity rates going through the roof and a reliance on law enforcement, as well as a trust of elected officials. Or in other words, people want someone else to take care of the problems because they themselves have been taught to not take care of their own problems. So the idea of deep soy is perhaps governments are immobilizing their people as either a means of just putting domination over them or preparation for some final step. of some kind. My money's on the
Hmm.
weaponized femboys thing, but
Yep.
I guess we'll have to find out. I don't know if I can say this word on YouTube. Probably not. So the Tibetan prostitution stocks refers to the rampant rates of prostitution that exist within the region of Tibet. So Tibet politics is weird. Pretty much China tells them what to do and Tibet's not happy about it, or at least from all the research I've done, that seems to be the case. So prostitution's illegal in China, but Tibet does not care. To put it
Oh.
into perspective, prostitution is so
Good on
rampant
them, I
in
guess.
some parts of Tibet that in some of the cities I was reading about, 10% of the women are involved in prostitution, which 10%
Dang.
itself may not seem like a lot, but think if
That
any
is.
city that you're familiar with had 10% of the people as prostitutes, what that would mean not only for the economy but of the societal rings around it. Now again, it's illegal, so all of these are officially done as massage parlors and day spas and other stuff that we all actually know what's going on. So in that whole 10% thing, that's 10% of places where it's a known fact that it's a prostitution ring, which means the actual number is probably higher. So the whole theory around it is, we know that elitist circles and governments like to do not so nice things to people that don't deserve. I'm talking about the Epstein stuff. So the idea being that perhaps China knows that it's such a rampant problem in Tibet but lets it go because it's a means of appeasing their world clientele that they host in this disgusting way. Or in other words, China doesn't do anything about it because powerful, important people in the world doesn't want anything to be done about it. After that last one, this is where I clarify that this is a YouTube channel. I am only making jokes. None of these are serious. And hopefully, yeah, we're talking about a weird one next, so that it's fine. It's just jokes. Haha, jokes. Fire is alive is a concept that fire itself is alive.
I mean,
for one, think about our concepts of what constitutes life and how many of them fire is in line with. It reproduces. It grows on its own. It maintains a homeostasis thermal temperature to itself. It moves on its own. And it eats and excretes on its own as well. Really, the only thing that it doesn't have in common with understood life is that it's not made up of cells. But as we've talked about earlier on this,
I mean, it also breathes, technically. Maybe that's what he meant by ingest. But I was thinking he was meaning it eats wood, but it ingests oxygen, right? That's pretty, yeah, it aligns with almost everything.
what it doesn't have in common with understood life is that it's not made up of cells. But as we've talked about earlier on this chart, perhaps something doesn't need to be made up of cells or carbon-based in order to exist. In other words, concepts of energy beings or supernatural things from another dimension that simply pierce through the veil occasionally as energy creatures can be seen with fire itself. Or at the very least, perhaps how plasma is formed within fire and is a constantly replicating energy source that could be the secret to other forms of life outside of our understanding. Eating food makes you age, while this is apparent on the chart, is technically true because if you don't eat, you'll die, which means you won't get any older. So,
Okay.
checkmate, atheist. I mean, technically, like, aging is caused by telomeres being cut in the body as someone continues to not die. And technically, the energy that is used from ATP in order to cut these telomeres comes from food. So, I mean, kind of, sort of. But again, the alternative is you die. So, you know, pick and choose, I guess. Antarctica prevarication is simply saying that the conversation around Antarctica is often kind of weird. Specifically, the way that organizations cover up stuff about Antarctica is odd. Like, for example, there were satellite images of what appeared to be a pyramid that was seen in Antarctica from a satellite, to which the governments collectively all at once went, oh, it's a mountain. Yeah, it's a mountain. So then someone pointed out that there was another pyramid that was very similarly shaped nearby, and they're like, yeah, that one's a mountain too. It's just mountains. Don't look at the pictures anymore. And if you're familiar with a lot of the...
If this is a picture, that is surprisingly, like, straight. Like, there's a little bit of wobble on this one side, but all the other sides look almost identically straight. I don't know, maybe from the way the wind hits them, but the wind wouldn't hit at a straight edge. It would curve, so it would make it more of circular looking. So that would look man-made more than, you know, wind-made.
Just mountains. Don't don't look at the pictures anymore. And if you're familiar with a lot of the hunts for Hitler that happened after World War II, all of the public questioning of U-boats potentially making their way towards Antarctica was shut up immediately, and no one looked into it. Just look at Operation High Jump, which I also talked about in Tier 2 for an example of that. And then you start looking at all the cave systems that may
Admiral
exist underneath
Bird,
Antarctica
I
because
think,
of the way
was one
poles
of 'em.
work, and that if the Earth's a magnetic field, then it makes sense that there would be more of a rift of the rock in Antarctica. And then keep in mind that governments just keep on saying that it's a totally desolate wasteland. It's just hundreds and thousands of miles of ice, and there's nothing more to look at. It's just nothing. And then realize that after World War II, the Antarctica Treaty was made, which is an organization of governments that say no normal people can go to the island without government approval. I use island loosely. This thing's like one of the largest continents on the planet. And all the other misdirection and weird secrets that have to do with it. And it makes you wonder. And the more research I do
Antarctica
about all
is
this
weird.
crazy stuff, the more I realize, maybe all those textbooks that I've read that have said the Earth is just a solid ball and there's nothing underneath it besides us are really dumb. Because if you've ever looked at like a porous rock that is full of holes because it has water and stuff on it, and then you think that the Earth is just a giant composite rock with 75% water all over it, and then you think that I'm sure there's nothing beneath us, it's just straight solid rock and everything that the government tells us is true, and there's definitely not giants underneath. And I am going off the deep end. All right, back to it. 1800s technology, while vague, there are some really crazy concepts in it. See, in the early 1800s, before we discovered how cool electricity was, technology was going a whole other direction. Like, for example, in the early 1800s, there was a prototype for something known as prana rays, which were essentially sunglasses that, when put on, would supposedly show you the aura of the person you were looking at. Combine that with concepts that in dowsing, there were these special rods that, when held in the air, would bend in the direction of water underneath the earth. And it makes you think of, if it wasn't for electricity and the modern conveniences we have, where technology would have gone in the more spiritual direction. Door dogs are a legend that originates in Africa, which essentially says that whenever someone is about to die, as they're passing through a doorway, a small dog can be seen with them. In every case, the person who is about to die cannot see the dogs themselves. A lot of the first-hand accounts I read were really interesting. Like, for example, there was a European hunter who was in Africa for a while and spoke with several of the locals about the legends of these door dogs, and he himself, while riding, was fearful because earlier that week, when passing through a doorway, a young child asked what the dog was next to him, and of course he couldn't see the dog. To which shortly afterwards, the guy writing this story died. So that's not weird at all. And while the concept of it may be scary, in most traditions I read, it seems as if this is seen as not necessarily a good thing, but a peaceful thing, as if the small dog is a sort of
dying
guide
is
or
peaceful.
comfort to pass you on into the next life. One-worldness has to do with a concept of analyzing humanity itself. Essentially, think of it this way. A lot of the times we look at certain empires that have risen and fallen, or certain groups of people that have gone through trouble, and we see that as an isolated incident, whereas one-worldness is saying they are all parts or individuals in the actual experiment that's happening, which is the world. Or in other words, all occurrences that have ever happened are part of one continuous string that we are still on, which would mean that no real change or learned behavior from the previous examples is possible, or the whole those who forget history are doomed to repeat it is sort of an inevitable conclusion, as we're going to repeat the same thing over and over because we're still all part of the same experiment, which all ties back into simulation theory again. Because perhaps we were all set up as this program in a computer in order to see what the results of all this would be. I mean, look at me. I'm fake. I'm in a box right now, behind a screen, talking to you about how you're actually behind a screen. Isn't that just weird? I'm probably fake. You don't know. I may not even be real. See this coffee cup? This isn't real either. Every time the Giants or Hollow Earth comes up in one of these videos, I'm just so weird for the rest of it. Fukushima's gateway refers to the Fukushima reactor disaster that happened on March 11th of 2011. For those that don't know, Fukushima was a large nuclear power plant in Japan that an earthquake and tsunami destroyed the plant and almost caused a super bad nuclear meltdown. The historical story is very interesting.
At least it didn't.
Short version, essentially what happened is they needed a way to cool down the reactor really, really fast, and all of the power supplies and all the fail safes had gone bad because of the earthquake and tsunami. So the solution was they just knocked the thing down and had ocean water pour over it as a means of cooling it down so there wouldn't be a like super nuke disaster, which worked. However, the theory
Hey,
is the
good
energy
on
that
'em.
was released, because there was a lot of radioactive energy released at once, was enough to open up a portal or gateway. This all goes back into the idea that we can't perceive dimensions around us, and as a means to break into these other dimensions, it would take a lot of energy, say a nuclear reactor. So this theory goes a step further and says perhaps the disaster was purposeful, and that's why every single security or failsafe system
I don't know about
went
that one.
down, because someone had sabotaged it. And perhaps either someone crossed over to another dimension or something from the other dimension came here. Which honestly, if you think about it, has anything been normal since 2011? That's what I thought. Lottery exists to catch time travelers.
That's pretty fun.
This one's fun though. I like the
Yeah.
idea that there's an agency in the future that time traveling is such a problem. They're like, oh, we'll go back in time and make there be a lot of money. And then it's just like bear traps set up for people who go back in time. But yeah, this one's fun. I like it. Whatever. Psyops don't exist is referring to psychological operations. This could have a lot of different definitions. However, the most common one is the idea of sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. In other words, it's like this. Say that I tell you about the Illuminati, and I say that there's this super evil group of people who work in world governments. And then you get really worried about the Illuminati, so you get all your rich super elitist friends together and say that you all have to go proliferate world governments to make sure nothing bad happens. Which means, because of me telling you that and you trying to react to it, you have created the thing that you were afraid of. Or in other words, paranoia of what might go wrong causes things to actually go wrong. And there's no fake stories that exist if people just keep making them boogeyman that they're afraid of. Vertical universe is the counterpoint to a horizontal universe.
Beautiful
So say that we're moving through
photo.
time in existence and everything's kind of flat, like we can move from it side to side. What if it's actually vertical? Or in other words, we are moving in a directly straight line with the existence above us and below us, something that we can't really reach. While this kind of falls in line with a very narrow existence of the universe, as some physicists think that we are in, you could take it a step further and say perhaps ideas of deities and demons are just people in either the future or past who have mastered a way to get to the higher or lower planes of existence. Or kind of the concept we exist as we're walking through a very long skyscraper, and some people have figured out to go to different floors. Prophecy's enforcing agency is the idea that there are organizations throughout history whose sole purpose is to make sure that prophecies come true. A lot of these theories relate back to the Bible, and specifically the predictions of Revelation that there will be a government in this place and a government doing this, and then this will happen as in line with the end times. And perhaps organizations like the Illuminati or the Freemasons are simply existing behind the scenes to make sure things go to plan. And then I guess it would depend on if these predictions are good or bad, if things like the Illuminati or the Freemasons would be good or bad. And if you look at some of the predictions from the Bible, some of those things are eerily true. So perhaps there are secret people behind the scenes making sure that everything stays according to the higher plan. Consciousness beamed from moon base. Okay. A lot of these
What?
theories go back to the whole idea of prison Earth, or the idea that we are not native to this planet and that the moon itself is sort of existing as our warden. So our consciousness and our understanding are regulated to make sure we don't get outside of our means of containment. And this also can be in relation to the commonly thought question of what comes first, thought or language, because some people consider it to be impossible to have thought without language, but like, what do you think people who have never heard a language do? Just don't think? So perhaps these greater overlords that have us in prison here aren't just monitoring where we go or what we do, but also how we think. Panergic men or panergic people
Whoa,
is
warn a
reference
person.
to special people who have existed throughout history. See, the word panergic itself basically means multiple skills or someone that can accomplish several tasks. And it's basically saying that people throughout history who have accomplished tremendous feats, which is everything from empires to technological advances, are in themselves a higher order of person. And most of the theories of this also go back to simulation theory and say that perhaps every time that we become stagnant within our simulation, a certain character is deposited, even without them knowing it, as a means to cause people to move or to cause events to happen. Or in other words, protagonists are
one's
randomly set up
interesting.
throughout human history as a means of keeping the story interesting. Human immortality, as it's referred to on the
That's it. Okay. yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. That was an amazing video as always. Wendigoon is such a great creator. I really appreciate him making this video because he's teaching me so many things I've never heard of. But I don't know how many more parts we have. We have probably like one, two, three, four, five, six-ish parts maybe. So we'll end at about 16. I might make two just so we end at an even like 15. Well, not even, odd 15. But anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll catch you guys later.